Hello everybody and welcome to how to build Skaven armies. First things first, let's go over the strengths and weaknesses of the Skaven. Of course, their strongest aspect is their technological superiority to most factions. Their weapons teams, their war machines, and their artillery units are more powerful than almost every single other faction in the game. They also have a number of very powerful monstrous units, which come with great speed, damage, and sometimes a little bit of toughness to tear up the enemy front lines. Finally, they're also a little faster than other factions for the most part, with some exceptions like the aforementioned artillery and weapons teams. As for their weaknesses, on the whole they have lower leadership than most, but their units do often come back multiple times after running, so it's not the end of the world. As I mentioned earlier, their most powerful ranged units and their artillery aren't the fastest, so are very easy to take out with enemy cavalry and monsters. And finally, anything that isn't meant for melee fighting in this roster tends to get rolled over faster than you can say yes yes. Now let's get into our early game composition. At this stage of the game we have access to tier 0 units: the Grey Seer of Ruin, the Grey Seer of Plague, the Master Assassin, the Warlock Master, the Warlord, Skaven Slaves, Skaven Slave Spears, and Skaven Slave Slingers. We also have access to tier 1 units, Clan Rats, and Clan Rat Spears. For the early game composition, I choose to lead my armies with the Warlock Master. In my opinion, this is the best option for Skaven Lords, since they eventually can get both the Skaven Spells of Ruin, which is Pog, and they can also get on Doomwheel mounts, which are also quite Pog indeed. Starting out, they won't be too bad in combat, and even with the basic spells, they can do well, so blob up the enemy and let the Warp Lightning rain. For the front lines, this is very boring. We're going with 10 Skaven Slave Spears. It's never worth getting Clan Rats, since the cost difference per turn isn't worth the difference in power unless you're bathing it in gold. Unfortunately, this does mean that Skaven Slaves are weak and cowardly, so will run fast, but they are Skaven, so I don't really know what else you expect. You just want to use them as a meat shield for your ranged units and pray that you make it to the mid game. Speaking of which, we are bringing 9 Skaven Slave Slingers. Their damage is pretty piss weak, but what else is there to do when they are the only ranged option at this stage? Just keep them safe and have them lay down constant fire on the enemy, and eventually they'll get worn down. The strengths of this army is that it's cheap as hell, since everything is a slave with either low or no upkeep. There are also a lot of ranged units for bursting down key enemy targets. Even though the damage isn't the best in the world, when you have that many units, you can focus things down pretty quickly. Finally, the Lord will come online relatively quickly if you grab some early spells, and he should carry these early game battles. As for the weaknesses, of course, the damage outside of the Lord is pretty anus, so anything with even a moderate amount of armor will ignore you easily. Leadership is also crap, so your army will be on the run in no time, even if they eventually come back. Pretty much every single stat in these units, in fact, sucks, aside from the Lord, but I don't know what you want me to do. It's the rat early game. Moving on to the mid tier now, we have tier 2 units: Shielded Clan Rats, Shielded Clan Rat Spears, a Chieftain, Night Runners, Slinger Night Runners, Assassins, Warp Grinders, Warp Fire Throwers, Wolf Rats, and Poison Wolf Rats. We also have tier 3 units: Storm Vermin Halberds, Storm Vermin Sword and Shield, Gutter Runner Slingers, Gutter Runners, Poison Gutter Runner Slingers and Poison Gutter Runners, Rattling Guns, Poisoned Wind Globadiers, Plague Claw Catapults, Warlock Engineers, Plague Monks, Plague Priests, Rat Ogres, and Pack Masters. For the mid-game composition, we're of course sticking with our Warlock Master, who should be getting a few more spells online, and possibly even a mount if you're impatient. They will be providing a ton of value, mainly with the spell spam and frontlines assistance. We're also going to pick up a Plague Priest, and this is one of the few times I'm going to recommend going double caster, because Jesus H. Christ, the rats have some bloody good casters. Both floors are jam-packed full of damage and utility, so use them both to your heart's content. For the front lines, we're going with 2 Storm Vermin Halberds and 4 Storm Vermin Top of Shield. The Halberdiers are the top of the line anti-large front lines infantry with great damage and even toughness, especially for a Skaven unit. You still want to rely on them to hold the enemy still for as long as possible and protect your many ranged units from harm. The Sword and Shield are the anti-infantry version of the Storm Vermin that also come with shields, so more defended from the enemy ranged assaults. I like to bring a mix of them rather than 6 of one to have some diversity in the damage and defense in my lines. As I said, ranged units are going to be doing all the work here, so having lads that can absorb attacks from all types of damage is just perfect. We're going to go with 4 Rat Ogres, of course, get something to do with spot work in the front lines, embed them, and have them tear apart anything that makes it clashing with your lines. For our ranged units, we're going to go with 4 Rattling Guns, because rats with miniguns. Need I say more? I will say more, because I need the watch time. These units are one of the most broken things in the entire game. They do tremendous damage and literally melt whatever you point them at. They suppress what they are targeting, meaning they are slower and easier to hit for longer, and if you're playing as the OG Cheesemeister himself, you can give these fuckers literally infinite ammo. Finally, we're going with 4 Plague Claw Catapults. They are the classic catapult unit for the rats, with good damage versus infantry blobs with large explosive projectiles. You really can't go wrong, especially with that fat range. For the strengths of this army composition, Rattling Guns, great ranged power overall. It's actually very tough and decently damaging in the front lines, and it has a bunch of utility and damage potential with the double mage. The weaknesses, however, it is pretty slow for the most part, especially those ranged units. The 2 mages also make it hard to spend the limited winds of magic wisely, and of course everything has low leadership aside from the front lines and the Lord and Hero, so if they get attacked once, chances are they're going to run very quickly. Finally, we come to the late game. We unlock tier 4 units: Eshin Triads, Death Runners, Eshin Sorcerers, Warplock Jezzails, Poisoned Wind Mortars, Deathglow Bombardiers, Warp Lightning Cannons, Doom Flayers, Brood Horrors, and Mutant Rat Ogres, and Tier 5 units, Doom Wheels, Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, and Hell Pit Abominations. For late game composition, the Warlock Master should have all their spells and the best Doom Wheel mounts by now. They want to be tearing up the enemy backlines, front lines, and any lines, and providing a lot of damage and utility with spells all throughout the battle. The Plague Priest should have all their spells and the Screaming Bell mounts. This provides a lot of support to the front lines with auras to keep your units around more, and the spells will give you even more damage and even summons if you have a lot of winds to burn. We're keeping the front lines same as before with the Storm Vermin with halberds and sword and shields in the 2 and 4 composition. We're swapping out our Rat Ogres for 2 Brood Horrors. These are a super speedy giant unit that will work great to take out the enemy backlines, just as well as they dive into the front lines to slaughter blobs with ease. We are dropping down to 2 Rattling Guns to make a room for other ranged units, like the Poison Wind Mortars, who we're bringing 2 of. They're an excellent artillery class ranged unit that obliterate almost anything you fire them at. These are great for firing over the heads of your own units, since they have such a steep firing arc, and they are a great unit to soften up the enemy as they approach. We're also going to bring 2 Warpluck Jezzails, which are great damage snipers over a massive range. They're a quality unit for focusing down key enemy targets, such as lords, heroes, and single entity units, since they do so much damage with such accuracy and from so far away. We're dropping down to 2 Plague Claw Catapults to make room for 2 Warp Lightning Cannons, which are kind of like Warblock Jezzails, but a bit bigger. They do incredible damage to single entities, but have a larger and more explosive shot, so they can do a nice bit of area damage. The strengths of this army are, of course, they extremely powerful ranged units, and overall having more range than most other factions. We're, of course, still keeping that tough front line, and are now bringing more powerful and much faster monsters. The weaknesses, however, this many ranged units does mean you can be stretched thin trying to keep them all safe. And again, the double mages can make it hard to manage your winds of magic. We also don't have the most fast units in the world for getting around the enemy backs, but you should outrange them in most cases, so it's not a massive issue. To close you out, I'll now pass you over to live commentary Miles. Take it away. And thank you. Thank you for that, Miles. As you can see, everybody, here we are, going against the Empire, of course. As I always say, they are the best litmus test for how your army is going to perform, since they have a little bit of everything. So I've deployed in my very similar to how I was deployed in the demonstration. I'm putting my ranged units up ahead since, well, I want them to have more range, and putting them behind my melee troops means I'm going to have to move everything up a bit further. But because the enemy has the Hellstorm rocket batteries, I'm still going to need to move a lot of my units up. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm also targeting all my artillery. So my warp cannons, Warp Lightning Cannons. I've got one of them targeting these Demogryph Halberdiers, Demogryph Knight Halberdiers, there we go, because they are quite threatening to my range units, so I want to take them out as quickly as possible. I've got another one targeting the Luminarch of Hysh, since it's just it's a single entity, it's armored, and these guys aren't great at taking out single entities. They aren't quite in range of the other Demogryph Knights, so I'm not targeting those just yet, but to be sure, when they get in range, I'll be trying to take them out as quickly as possible. The Plague Claw Catapults are, of course, targeting anything they can get their hands on, aka these Great Swords here, and then these Great Swords here. I'm choosing to target these guys because they are kind of in the middle of blobs, so you know if it's too far to the left or too far to the right, it's going to hit something, and the exact same thing here. So let's just skip forward a little bit as my ranged units get, well, into range. The Poison Wind Mortars are going to be targeting the enemy infantry. Same thing for the Rattling Guns. I'm pretty much just going to leave them on fire at will and wait for the enemy to come up to me, since, well, that's really where they are best used. The Warplock Jezzails, however, are going to be targeting key enemy units. So we'll see shortly here as I begin to target more and more enemy units. There we go. The first Warplock Jezzails are targeting that Luminarch of Hysh, trying to burst down as quickly as possible. And then the other ones are going to be targeting, I believe it's the General of the Empire here. So they'll be taking him out to make sure that he doesn't fly into my backlines and take me out. Now the enemy is starting to advance my position, so any minute now I'm going to give the order to move up my front lines to protect my precious ranged units. The Lord and the Brood Horror, and then the Caster Hero and the Brood Horror, both on my flanks. One of them has taken quite a shot there from the Luminarch of Hysh, so he's not feeling too good, but we're sure he will get his revenge. As you can see, the General of the Empire is now going to range with my Rattling Guns, and you can just see his health slowly being whittled away. They're not the best versus highly armored targets like this, but nevertheless they do some tremendous damage, and with the amount of ammunition, the firing rate, and the suppression, you really cannot go wrong. The slight problem with this map is this little divot here. A lot of my units need a line of sight to fire accurately, so it's a little bit of a challenge there for them, but nevertheless they're going to try their best and certainly get plenty of value. As you can see here, let's just slow things down a short amount. Oh, it's popping a few spells out. So we have, of course, the Warp Lightning coming down on these Halberdiers, although it might miss. It caught the tail end of him. I'll take that. And then we have a, what do you call it? The Plague spell. Which one is it? It is not that one. Okay, I can't remember what it's called, but the big Plague one you can see in a second here in this big old clump of 2 enemy Great Swords. Wonderful. Oh my god, look at their leadership and their health just drain away. So yes, let's just slow things down. So as you can see, the Poisoned Wind Mortars are just targeting any enemy infantry that they can. Slight issue is they're probably going to get a bit of friendly fire, but, you know, that's not really something that you worry about when you're playing as the Skaven. That's kind of an added bonus, if anything. On the right side here, we have my Warlock Master and the Brood Horror trying to take on the Empire Captain, but the Brood Horror is being overtaken by the Demogryphonite Halberdiers, and of course the regular Halberdiers. So I brought in my Storm Vermin Halberdiers to keep them busy, and buy this Brood Horror a bit of time and assistance. We also have the Warblock Jezzails and the Rattling Guns trying to assist taking out this Empire Captain, because, well, if there's nothing else for them to shoot at, which, let's be honest, there isn't for the Rattling Guns, unfortunately, in this battle, then we may as well make use of them there, because they do wonderful damage. As you can see, the Empire Captain, or the General of the Empire, is running from the battlefield, which is exactly what we want. My Brood Horror is now making his revenge on the Hellstorm rocket batteries, getting into their backlines and taking out their most valuable artillery pieces so they can get no more value, because they already have too many kills with 12 between them. Love to see that. I believe one Luminac of Hysh has been completely taken out. Another one is now starting to be focus fired by the Rattling Guns. God, look at that. It is just chef kiss. It is beautiful. And I just love Rattling Guns so much. Probably not the best ranged unit. In fact, definitely not the best ranged unit. And they are slightly shooting the Warblock Jezzails. And probably should stop that. But I just love them so much because miniguns, baby. And I need to say nothing more. This stage of the battle, again, it just always happens. We just are in that cleanup stage. Pretty much everything is starting to break. The Halberdiers are breaking. Damage sustained. My Brood Horror's had a little runaway, but, you know, he's a Skaven unit, so you kind of expect it. The Empire Captain is disengaging from the Poison Wind Mortars. And there we go, army losses, and he starts to shatter. And, of course, the only thing left, as is always left for the Empire, is the Bloody Caribou Greatswords. They never, ever break, it seems. So yes, this battle, I think I could have probably done a few things better, deployed my ranged units a little bit more efficiently so that they could fire a lot more during this battle, particularly the Rattling Guns. As I said, they don't have the most range and they need a line of sight, so it really helps if they are at the front of your lines rather than firing over the backs of your front lines. Otherwise, yeah, they tend to shoot your own units in the back, and even though you don't mind it as a Skaven, it's still not something you want to actively seek out. But anyway, let's break down things further in the stats. So here we are in the stats. First things first, the Warlock Master, 46 kills on that Doom Wheel with 6,000 damage done and only 757 damage value. As I said, or as you saw, he was fighting mostly the Halberdiers, the Nordland Mariners, however you want to pronounce it. So he wasn't doing the most damage value, but he was taking those units out, which would otherwise have taken out my Brood Horror and possibly loops around and got into my backline. So very, very good of him there. And of course, that cast wasn't the best one in the world, and I didn't do the most casts in this battle. But nevertheless, I appreciate his efforts. And of course, the Encourage is always useful for all units that are around him. The Plague Priest, however, 125 kills with 11,261 damage dealt and 1,437 damage value. The Plague Priest, the Skaven spells of Plague, they are very, very good, especially at area damage, and even versus these greatswords, they did some very spicy damage indeed. And of course, the great thing about that Plague Priest is once you put it on that Screaming Bell, put it into your front lines, the leadership bonus that it gives to all your units, it makes a big, big difference to the Skaven. Speaking of the front lines, we have 28, 21, not much damage value for the most of these guys, but as I mentioned earlier, these units are literally there to be a shield to protect your ranged units. If they get 0 kills, I don't really care, because they are literally just there to slow down the enemy and protect the units that are actually going to be doing all of the damage. Speaking of which, let's get into our ranged units. So 28 kills on the one Rattling Guns, and then just a singular kill on the other Rattling Guns. They must have been the ones that were targeting the enemy lords and heroes. As I said, Rattling Guns probably not the best of the Skaven weapons teams, simply because they don't have the most range in the world, and their armor-piercing damage isn't fantastic. If you really wanted to, you could probably swap them out for an extra Jezzail and an extra Wind Mortar. But I just love Rattling Guns so much. Watching them in battle is just a true joy to behold. And if the enemy has something that's charging them down and you have a full line of Rattling Guns, the enemy is not going to make it to you. They're going to get slowed down. They're going to get shot to pieces. And no other unit in the game really has that sort of just absolute suppressing fire effect. So I choose to take Rattling Guns despite their downfalls. Coming on to the Warlock Jezzails, 1,500 and 1,000 damage value with 17 kills on both of them, which is very, very even, and it does please me very much. Yes, these guys were mostly targeting your more armoured and your key targets on the enemy line. So they were targeting the General of the Empire, and of course the Empire Captain, and the Luminacs of Hysh. So they were targeting very high-value targets with their long-range armour-piercing missiles. So nothing else to say there. They did a great job and sniped those targets just like I want them to. The Poisoned Wind Mortars Ooh, beautiful. 1800 damage value and 1600 damage value with nearly 200 kills on the one unit and only 55 on the other, despite this one actually having more damage value. Very interesting. So these guys are mostly targeting the enemy front lines like their great swords, and then eventually we start targeting their back lines once the lines clash, because I didn't really want to get too much friendly fire. There's not really much to say about these guys. They are a ranged unit, but they function pretty much exactly like a shorter range artillery, so that's exactly how you want to use them. Keep them on the back lines, shooting over the tops of your unit's head to blow up clumps of enemy infantry, because nothing else on the ranged infantry roster really does it better. The Brood Horrors are extremely fast, as you saw, getting around into the back lines to take out the enemy artillery. That's pretty much the best case scenario to manage to sneak their way around the back. Although 68 damage value on the one there, that is very unfortunate. He was fighting the Empire Captain and the Halberdiers and unfortunately got routed before he could do any more work. But yes, you want to use their speed just like that to get around the backs of the enemies and take out their vulnerable units like the artillery and the ranged infantry. Moving on to the artillery now, 135 and 127 kills with over 1,000 damage value for both of these guys. Again, they were tagged in the enemy front lines and the enemy clumps of infantry units before the lines clashed, and they did a wonderful job at that. Softened up the great sword so that by the time that the lines clashed, they didn't really have enough left in the tank, even if they were just fighting my melee troops, but instead they were fighting my melee troops and my ranged troops and even more artillery. So they had no chance whatsoever. And finally, the warp cannons. Not the most kills between them, but again, it's all about damage value for these guys. So 2,300 damage value and 1,600 damage value there. Of course, they were tagged in the Luminax of Heish and the enemy characters like the Lord and the Hero. So, of course, not the most kills, but much more damage value. Yes, that about wraps things up for this video on how to build Skaven armies. Thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video at any point, then do be sure to leave a like. It really does help out quite a lot. If you want to see more videos like this, more videos on Total War Warhammer 2, more videos on all sorts of different strategy games, I'll let you in on a little tease here. There's a video coming out on Friday that's not on Warhammer 2, so definitely be sure to subscribe if you want to find out what that is. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, here on YouTube, over on Twitch, and of course on the Patreon. In particular, I'd like to thank Kobe Said So and It's Your Boy LC for their wonderful support at the Unclean Ones tier. Really can't thank you guys enough, even though I do say it every single week. One more time, thank you to all of you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.